In the next half an hour, we're going to talk about Renderer2 and the role of this very interesting piece of Angular architecture. We will dive a little bit into the underhood of the Angular to see how things are working. And yeah, Mateusz already did some part of my work. He introduced me. Yeah, my name is Dmytro Mezhenskyi. I'm author of Decoded Frontend YouTube channel. You can scan this QR code and you will be navigated to my YouTube, where you can explore different videos, check them out, maybe subscribe and check my video courses as well. Anyway, why I have chosen this topic? Well, everything started from one of my recent videos. It was like top 7 myths about Angular, where I covered some things that were right at some point in time about Angular, but nowadays it's not relevant anymore. And there was a part about Renderer2. And there I said that, okay, we no longer need Renderer2 in our application code. And after some time, I was reached by one of my followers who asked a reasonable question like, okay, if we don't need it anymore, why it wasn't just deprecated? And I was like, okay, that's actually a great question, and I don't have right and accurate answer for that. And I started to investigate and diving into this topic, and today I'm going to share with you my findings, what I found, and I hope it will be interesting and useful for you. So what we are going to cover is that, the role of Renderer2 in Angular, as I already said. We will see when it makes no sense to use render. And you will see some use cases, very, very rare use cases, when you still need it. So let's get started. And let's get started with understanding what is Renderer2. And here I personally separate the concept of a renderer and the Renderer2 as a token, injection token, or like certain part of the Angular API. So as a concept, renderer is responsible for creation and manipulation of the DOM elements in component templates, and it also applies eventually styles to our components. And Renderer2, it's an abstract class that defines API for already some concrete renderer, and it is used as an injection, not injection token, but the token that you use in order to inject the component renderer. And here on the right side, you can see some part of API that this Renderer2 class defines. So you can create element, you can append childs, create text, whatever. And how does it work? If you are curious enough, then you probably try to see how your component look after the compilation. If not, there is a chance to check this out. So as you can see, after the compilation, our template isn't represented as a string like we have in the source code, but instead it is represented by a function that runs also inside a bunch of other smaller functions. In context of Angular and Ivy renderer in particular, they are called instructions. Those are very little functions that perform certain little task regarding the DOM manipulation. Like element start, it creates an HTML element, instruction text, create a text with a string hi, etc. And usually this is where like research stops. This is already quite crazy to go into this part. But if you go further and have a look what is going on inside these instructions, for example, element start, you will see there some interesting lines of codes. For example, you will see that from the L view, which is a logical view, this is the internal data structure that Angular uses to store instances for different stuff that component needs, for example, renderer. And from there, from this L view, we get an instance of the renderer associated with the particular component. You can think of it as a injection, yeah, something like dependency injection. I don't want to dive into the differences, but as a mental model, that should be okay to think about it like that. And if you go further, there is a huge call stack of calling different other functions, and one of the functions is create element node. That obviously creates a node, and you can see that a renderer is being used there by this function, and there we call the create element method from the particular renderer, and eventually it creates HTML element that is rendered and what we see eventually on the screen. But why do we need like this renderer, this abstraction layer? Why cannot we just interact with everything directly through the DOM API? This is because we actually need multiple different renderers that we can switch at runtime, and those renderers, they should perform different ways of rendering our templates. Again, the question, but why? Why it is needed? Well, this is because components, they can be created in various modes and environments. What I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at this simple component. As you know, in our Angular components, we can enable or disable encapsulation, view encapsulation, using the encapsulation property and set it to none, emulate, and so on. We'll see them in a minute. And in the constructor, I just inject the render that associated with this component. And behind this renderer token, there will be resolved a particular renderer that does actual work. And there I just destructure the name of the constructor so that the console log will see the class name that stays behind this renderer token. And if we use view encapsulation on, so we don't encapsulate view and styles for our component, in the browser console, you will see that there was used non-encapsulation DOM renderer class. So this is concrete implementation of renderer that knows how to render stuff for this particular mode. And if you have a look at the source code of it, you will see that there is no actually magic. I removed a small part of other additional checks that are happening in real source code, but I just wanted to simplify things. But eventually what is happening there, it's just interaction with the document, with a normal document that is part of the global window, and create elements. So actually we interact with the native JavaScript DOM API, no magic at all. And eventually, this renderer will render our component in such a way so that we have application demo component and paragraph with a string hi. If you do a similar thing, but for emulated view encapsulation, which is actually default way, right? You will see that the output will be another type of render. It will be emulated encapsulation DOM Renderer2, such a long name. And you can see that it does slightly different piece of work. First, it creates element like the previous do. And by the way, this renderer extends like if you have a look at the source code, this renderer extends the previous one. And it calls the super call, so it performs just creation of the DOM element as previous one. But additionally, what it additionally does is it sets the special attribute which applies certain like hash attribute to the component that emulates actually the encapsulation. You know how it looks like. You all saw it many times in your Angular applications. This is this ng host, ng hash, and ng content ng special hash. This is how Angular emulates encapsulation of your styles, so that styles you define in the styles property, they like applicable, they are not global, they visible only in scope of this component view. That's the idea. And of course, the similar story for the if you enable the shadow DOM. Shadow DOM also has a dedicated renderer. It calls shadow DOM renderer, and it creates element the same way as the first renderer we saw, but additionally, the shadow DOM renderer inside the constructor, it does some additional work, like attaches shadow DOM to the component, right? And eventually you will see that rendered component, but with the shadow root attached. So this is the idea. And also, if you try to, what is also interesting, if you provide animations to your application and try to console log render for any of component with any view encapsulation strategy, so you will see that there will be like resolved base animation renderer. And what is interesting is that base animation renderer, it actually kind of delegates work eventually to the non-encapsulation renderer or shadow DOM renderer, depending on what encapsulation strategy your component has. But it knows how to perform some little tweaks with animations. But this is not all as well. If you try to apply animations array to your component, then your component will be rendered by the animation renderer that can handle bits more specific use cases related to animations. And we will see some of them later in the end of my talk. But what I wanted to say by showing you all these things is that the concept of the renderer is widely used under the hood. You can see it's like everywhere when it comes to rendering stuff. And here's the question, like, but do we need it in our application code? And well, mostly no. Mostly we don't need it, despite it is widely used under the hood. This is because, like, if you have a look at the implementation of any of these renderer classes I mentioned, you will see that a lot of them they just delegate work to the native DOM API. So add class does nothing special. It just uses the class list and adds the class name you want to add to this element. So this is the same result as if you use the native element, then if you use the element ref, then you access native element and use the same API. There is no difference. And a lot of the API in renderers, they like do the same thing. It's just a necessary wrapper, and even more because this wrapper defines, as you can see, element is any, and it is any in everywhere in every render, at least from what I saw. In this case, it kills the typings immediately. And if you try to set property, for example, some input element, and you made a typo, you said not a placeholder but something else, you will not see any build error or anything like that. But if you do this through the native native API, you have strict typings there. But again, here's like a small note. This is not what you have to do in your application. You should never, like, not never, but try to avoid manipulation, direct manipulation of DOM elements in Angular. Rely on what Angular provides you. This is just for like demo learning purposes. This is not advise you to do that. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to show that sometimes, yeah, it might happen, and typings issue might be occur, and with renderer you might have such a problems. Yeah, we will be talking today a lot about the things that you actually don't need to do in your production apps, but that's good for understanding how the framework is actually working. Anyway, so use cases when the Renderer2 is still needed. We still have few of them. Again, warning that things you will see later, it's just use cases that happen so rare, and personally I have never had such a use cases in my practice, but maybe for some of you it might be useful. And yeah, just keep in mind that try to solve issues first with the normal Angular approaches by creating embedded views, stuff like that. And that Renderer2 and manipulation with DOM should be your like last resort, so to say. And the first use case, it's when you have to create DOM nodes respecting their encapsulation. So you, for example, can use render and create some div element. And if you do it through render, then your div will be created with attribute hash that matches the one of the component where it is created. So as you can see in my concrete scenario right here, I create an element within the demo component, but I append this child to the body. So this element appears completely in different place, not inside the component view, but somewhere else. But they have the same encapsulation hash, which means that styles for the div will be applicable to this newly created div, even though it is not part of this HTML3. All right. So again, I see it maybe somehow like if you want to create overlay, this is some potential use case, and you want to keep like styles encapsulated, and you don't want to leak them global only to apply them to the newly created div that is not part of your view. maybe in this use case it would be useful, but yeah. Anyway, this is what you can do. This is the first use case. And the second one is animation toggling. So you know that in animations, we can animate different elements by using this add property and define different animation state. And when the state changes, the Angular performs this transition, right? And if you try to change it somehow, using their native API, in native DOM API, it will not work because such a property doesn't exist for the native element. And even if you suppress the type checking and make it make it so that the code will be compiled, it will not work anyway, because this is Angular specific thing, and it has to be handled through the Renderer2, because so you have to use the set property, provide the animation property, and then change the state of your animation. And how it works, this is because set property, it overrides, namely set property of the animation renderer, it overrides slightly the logic, and before the property is applied, it performs a check that if the name of the property starts with @ sign, namely animation prefix, it understands that, okay, we are talking about animation. So the second step, it checks if animation is disabled or not. And if it is not disabled, then it delegates animation processing to the animation engine. And animation will be triggered and used. Otherwise, if it's not animation, then there will be a set property, just again using the JavaScript DOM native API. Another use case, and it is also related to animations, this is the handling animation events. If you didn't know, Angular animations expose two additional events that you can listen to and perform some actions when they happen. This is the animation start and animation done. I think this is pretty easy to understand the intention just from the name. And what is interesting also is that if you try to use or listen for these events using the add event listener, it will not work as well. And this is, again, the use case when you have to use a renderer and use the corresponding listen method that can handle this type of events, and you can subscribe to these animation events and perform the job you need. Right, and this is pretty much everything I would like to share with you. Those are my findings about renderer. I hope it was interesting, and if you know real-life use cases about any of these three cases I showed you, please let me know in the comments or reach me somehow. I'm really interested because I have never had the need for that. And this is pretty much it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dmytro. Really nice presentation about the renderer, which sometimes might be tricky for the people, like when to use, when we shouldn't use, and so on. And we have already the question here regarding this kind of the thing. So,
okay,
is using Renderer2 comes with performance side effects?
I don't think that you have any performance issues with the. I mean, if we compare to manipulating DOM API like natively or via renderer, I don't think that we have any like performance differences, because as I showed, Renderer2 very often just like wrapper additional method around the native DOM API. So I think it should be pretty much the same.
Yeah, we are safe, right? Just using the Renderer2.
Yeah, but you're safe. But my point is that in most cases, you don't have to use it because there is no need. Only for those 3 unique cases, which happen so rarely.
Okay. Let's see whether there will be more questions. There was also some digression from Carol that, as I remember, Angular team wanted to deprecate Renderer2. I don't know whether it's somehow still valid.
Fairly speaking, I didn't hear that. Maybe it was like about deprecating it for like usage in your application code. But from what I see, render is very like heavily used in the rendering system of the Angular, and I don't know, maybe they have plans to switch to something different that will not involve render, and after that there will be deprecation and eventually removing that. That's those things I don't know.
Okay. There is one more question. Where should I prefer Renderer Factory 2 over just Renderer2? Any best practices?
Well, they serve a bit different issues. Like Render Factory 2 allows you to, like Renderer2, this is already the token you can use to inject renderer into your like component and then call some methods. And the role of the Render Factory is to resolve which exactly renderer will be used associated with this Renderer2 token. And so Render Factory 2 you would need to use if you want to implement your own renderer. And for example, you want to render component, I don't know, maybe not the best example, but in Canvas. And there it's slightly different. It's not the HTML, right? And so you would need to implement something like Canvas renderer, and you want to render component with this renderer. So you will use the Render Factory in order to provide this your custom renderer.
Okay.
And after that, you already like work with it.
Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong. It means like Renderer2 you use to just get the instance of the currently existing renderer, and Render Factory 2 is just to create the how this instance should looks like, right? And then
something like that. You can, I think you can think of it like you use factory resolution modifier when you perform some logic, and depending on this logic you say that okay, this renderer will be used or that renderer will be used. And Render Factory 2, this is the way how you provide the render you want. So in short, this is the way, just provide your own renderer, your custom renderer.
Okay, and the last question, is there any relation between Zone.js and Renderer2? Meaning that it will not be working if it removes from framework entirely.
I think they serve like they are very different. Yeah, so rendering and Zone.js, they serve different purposes. Zone.js, it's about notifying Angular that some async event happens in our application, and we should trigger change detection. And rendering, it's this is the like already we can say that part of change detection or part of the initial component rendering. They don't like if we remove zone.js, the change detection will be triggered by some other mechanism, like we have currently, right? Zoneless. And then the renderer and its method will be involved just by this new mechanism. So they do not, like the removing of the zone.js will not impact, I think so, will not impact.
So it's like zone.js is responsible for triggering something what's operate on the renderer after some time. It's not directly connected, right?
So they kind of, they work together like many other things in Angular, but they serve like totally different purposes.
Okay, so that's it. So Dmytro, thank you one more time for being with us, for finding time for us. It was really a pleasure to have you with us, and have a nice day, and hopefully we'll have the chance to cooperate together again in some future events.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks all your team for organizing this awesome event. Great job. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thanks. So have a nice
and everyone
evening.
Else, you too, and everyone who watched our stream.